Hello everyone and welcome once again to The View from the Midwest. It's time for another Bleedin' Blue edition as we look at the NHL Central. And as always, you can get all your Blues information at bleedinblue.com. We've got a lot of good stuff up there talking about some of the potential draft picks that the St. Louis Blues might be interested in, perhaps moving up in the draft to pick some local kids who have a lot of talent that they could bring to the team either in a couple years or even right now. Up until free agency starts on July 1st, but we've still got a while before that happens, especially with the Stanley Cup Finals still going on. Talking about the NHL Central now, we'll start off with the Minnesota Wild, and you can get your information on them over at GonePuckWild.com. They've got a lot of good stuff going on right now. The Minnesota Wild are apparently looking for goaltending help for Devan Dubnyk, who played over 80% of the team's games this past season. And in today's game, that really isn't a sustainable number. You don't necessarily see a lot of the top guys getting that kind of work. 75% is kind of where you're going to cap yourself out if you want to keep yourself fresh for the playoffs, because even guys that get split time during the regular season, we saw it with Brian Elliott. You get into the playoffs and you're playing 18, 20, 26 games straight, or however many you're going to end up playing, and it just takes a toll on you, even the goaltenders, because you have that much more presence in front of the net, you have that much more pressure on you to make the stop, and it just gets to be a little bit overwhelming. So you need to have that good goaltender. Not everybody's going to have the options that the Blues have had and that Anaheim has had and a couple other teams throughout the league have had, to where they have a goaltender where it's basically not a backup. You have a 1A and a 1B and what have you. Not everybody's going to have that. There aren't that many quality goaltenders throughout the league. But that is what everybody is looking for, because that is kind of the way the game is going right now, to where, yes, you do want to have that guy that you can lean on, especially come the postseason, but 80% or higher played during the regular season is just not going to cut it overall. Like the Blues, the Wild are exploring trade possibilities with the Edmonton Oilers. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins is a name that's just about on everybody's list, since the Edmonton Oilers general manager said basically everybody but Connor McDavid is available for trade. Now, what it would take to get them versus actually being available for trade is kind of two different things. But Nugent-Hopkins is somebody that the Wild are obviously interested as well. Dumba, Spurgeon, and Prosser were all names listed on Puck Wild that obviously the Wild are willing to potentially explore that kind of trade to get a little more scoring punch. Obviously that would take away some on their blue line. They don't necessarily have quite the depth that some of the other teams around the league do. But if you can bring in somebody who's going to not only put up goals but assist on them as well, the way that Ryan Nugent-Hopkins can when he's at his peak, and that would take some of the offensive pressure off of Koivu, then obviously the Minnesota Wild would not be hesitant to pull a trade like that. The Dallas Stars, via our friends over at blackoutdallas.com, apparently the Stars are not willing to buy out either of their goaltending contracts, which is going to be an interesting dilemma over the next year or two, because right now Niemi and Lettinen are both getting paid a combined $10 million just for goaltending positioning. I still think that one of them gets moved, but if you're not going to buy anybody out, that means that you have to find a trade partner who's willing to take on that kind of money, and that's not necessarily going to be something that the players are going to be overly interested in, because right now a lot of the teams that are in need of goaltending help but could afford to bring in that kind of contract are going to be the teams in the bottom half of the league. Now, perhaps Niemi or Lettinen have some sort of super year, and they vault those teams into the playoffs. However, it's not very likely, so it's going to be an interesting scenario there to see what comes of that. The Stars are going to have a lot of question marks on the blue line come next season. According to Josh Clark, there aren't a whole lot of free agent options that are very interesting to the Dallas Stars right now. They do have several players to decide on in terms of renewals or walking away. Goligoski and Chris Russell are kind of at the head of that list as well. So talking about there's not a whole lot of options in terms of bringing defensemen in for Dallas. They need to keep what they have then, because they obviously had a decent enough mix to make a good run into the playoffs. And they're going to need some extra defensive help if they want that to progress. Valeri Nichushkin is also a restricted free agent who had a breakout season when he first entered the league, and injury problems have kind of hampered him there as well, so they've got a decision to make on him as well. Obviously, you have more freedom when it's a restricted free agent, depending on what kind of years of service they've put in. They might be arbitration eligible. It might be more of a clear-cut option of either you take what we offer or you don't kind of thing. So for more on that, go to blackoutdallas.com. The Chicago Blackhawks, the top headlines at Blackhawk Up. The Blackhawks have signed a Czech defenseman named Michael Kempny, so they're trying to solidify their blue line a little bit, getting some European help. But that's also going to kind of bring up a few questions, because they've got a lot of free agents that they need to worry about. Who are they going to bring back? Obviously, one of the top names there is going to be Andrew Shaw. Now, I know that he's a forward, and Kempny is a defenseman, but they do have some issues on the blue line as well. They weren't as deep as they have been in years past, giving up players like Sharp and Oduya and what have you over the years. And it kind of caught up to them a little bit against the St. Louis Blues. Now, I still think that Chicago's got some pretty good defenders, but that was just kind of the word going through the ranks, that they didn't have the depth that they had in years past. Some of the other stuff about the Blackhawks, Mike Brannon made the case that the Blackhawks should re-sign Richard Panik. Now, he's talked about keeping that line that they used a little bit in the playoffs with, I believe it was Panik, Taves, and it was either Panarin or Teravainen, I forget which. But he thought that worked as a top line. Perhaps I wasn't watching the same thing. I didn't think it did. Now, his argument about what Panik brings to that line is spot on, that it provides more defensive cover, because Panik is a little bit rougher. He's more able to get physical with some of the opponents. So if anybody's trying to take advantage of Jonathan Taves, then Panik can step in. And I understand that, and if Chicago has the depth that they've had in the past, then it works out. If they have not, then all of a sudden you don't have quite the scoring punch that you thought you would on the top line, because Richard Panik is capable of scoring goals, but not necessarily at the clip that you would like someone playing on the top line. So that's going to be an interesting decision whether they bring him back or not. As I mentioned, they've got other free agents like Andrew Shaw, and some that are other movable pieces that they might be looking to try to kind of move around, perhaps to keep Shaw, perhaps to just kind of give themselves a little more wiggle room, as there's a lot of teams inching up towards that salary cap. And right now, it's not looking like it's going to move up. The players obviously have the option to move it up, but even then it would only be by about $3 million, which isn't going to give teams a whole lot of wiggle room on that. The Colorado Avalanche have been in full off-season mode. Most of the notes at milehighsticking.com have been about free agency and potential trades that they're looking at. Clearly, the biggest names that the Avs are concerned about on their own roster is Tyson Barrie right now. It'll be interesting to see how things shake out with that talented defenseman. Many of the sites have him on the trading block, but Nadia Archuleta does not believe that that is likely to happen. So go ahead and check that article to find out her reasons why they don't think that it would be wise for the Colorado Avalanche to trade that defenseman. Obviously, Barry's a little bit further along in his progression, but I do agree that it would be a little bit of a mistake in trading him simply because the Kevin Shattenkirk trade didn't work out for Colorado at all. They do still have Erik Johnson on the team, but even though the Blues are a little bit more willing to give up on Kevin Shattenkirk right now, I would have to say that offensively, Kevin Shattenkirk has been more of a staple on his team than Erik Johnson has been on the Avalanche. So I do think that it would be kind of in that vein if they gave up on Barrie right now. Some of the other things going on in free agency that they are looking at, David Backes and Chris Stewart are two of the interesting names that they're talking about over at Mile High Sticking. The Avalanche are one of those teams that anywhere David Backes goes in the division is going to be extra salt in the wound if he does indeed leave the St. Louis Blues. The Avalanche, given their state, are a little bit more palpable right now, a little bit more palatable, I guess I should say, in terms of being okay on the stomach. Chris Stewart would be interesting simply because he's been one of those players throughout his career. When he's motivated, he's extremely hard to keep off the score sheet, and when he is not, he's just absolutely a ghost. And he started off in Colorado. They traded him away to bring him back. Would be kind of a full circle type of deal, but it would be also kind of interesting to see how that plays out, because obviously the Colorado Avalanche knew something about Stewart when they were willing to get rid of him. Obviously they wanted to bring in Erik Johnson and the other pieces that were part of that trade. But obviously Stewart wasn't necessarily fitting into their plans at the time, and to bring him back now would be kind of an interesting little full circle thing that we would have right there. The Nashville Predators seem to be in full draft mode. You can check out some of the interesting mock drafts that they've got going on over at predlines.com. Another interesting that's up on their article is an interesting article about Alexander Radulov. He seems to be kind of in the Vladimir Sobotka boat, as he is interested in coming back to the NHL. Now, apparently Radulov would be a free agent, so that's different than Sobotka, because Sobotka still has a year left on his deal with the St. Louis Blues. But apparently Radulov and his off-the-ice antics, and even some of the stuff that he does on the ice, have been enough so that certain Russian teams, number one, aren't necessarily eager to keep him over there. But there's a lot of weird things going on with teams not paying their salaries, which is why a lot of players are looking to move back. But the Predators are apparently a little bit tired of all of it, and thus not going to be interested in re-signing him. The Detroit Red Wings are apparently a team that's interested in Radulov. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. Keep tuned to predlines.com for more on that. And the Winnipeg Jets are very, very quiet right now, which is kind of interesting, because you would think you'd hear a lot about draft moves and potential picks and everything, but very quiet on the front there for the Winnipeg Jets. The biggest news right now is 31-year-old defenseman Grant Clitsome was forced to retire due to back issues. It wasn't any one specific injury. I think it was just kind of an accumulation. He did have to have surgery back in January, and thus he couldn't really overcome that. And unfortunately for him, his career is now over a few years earlier than he would have liked. The Jets also signed their 2014 pick, Nelson Nogier. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. And from the rumor mill, Andrew Ladd is apparently interested in returning to the Jets via free agency. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out and whether or not he goes back, or whether or not he ends up with another team, perhaps even in the Central Division, that will not be the Chicago Blackhawks, because he might not fit in with their salary cap issues, because they've got quite a few. But that'll wrap up our look at the NHL Central. Hopefully you enjoyed it. A little bit longer than I intended, but there's a lot of interesting news. Check out our various sites on Fansided. Just go to the NHL tab, and then you kind of have to search through there. Obviously, I've given you some of the names: Mile High Stickin', Blackout Dallas, Blackhawk Up. I forget what the name of the Winnipeg one is. It seems to be kind of in flux right now. and then the Gone Puck Wild is Minnesota's as well. And Predlines.com. We have a good relationship with Dave over there. So hopefully you enjoyed that video and our look at the NHL Central. Keep it tuned to bleedandblue.com. We've got a lot of stuff going up. Until the next time, though, I'll see you then.